Does this logo look familiar to you? If it does, you've probably been to the leak library known as Cryptome. And unfortunately, I have some really sad news to report today. It appears that John Young of Cryptome has passed away at 89 years old. Very sad to hear this. I believe it was March 28th, if I recall, that this happened, and I read about it across various reputable journalists, social media profiles, so undoubtedly it appears this news is true. Now, John Young is actually even called the spiritual godfather of online leaking, and that's just how far his history goes back. He actually started Cryptome in 1996, so we're talking several decades ago. He started this website as a leak library. He particularly didn't want to call it a leak site. According to his interviews, he preferred to call it a library. He preferred to call it akin to a dimly lit, dusty library. He wasn't out for impressing with the design. It was a very simple design for a website, just with various documents that people would turn in, and this was before WikiLeaks. In fact, this website came out before even Jullian Assange dropped out of college. Now, I wanted to report on the legacy of John Young today because to me, this was one of those figures, those unstoppable people that no matter what would do what they knew, or at least in their heart believed to be right. So regardless of what you believe, this is someone who really believed in something, believed in the right to privacy, believed deeply in that, and was a avid member of the cypherpunk mailing list. Now, a cypherpunk, if you're not familiar with that term, it's someone who believes in maximizing their privacy and someone who believes in using cryptography in order to further enhance their privacy along with anonymity tools. So right along the line of the subject of the blog, while this is not a leak-related blog, it's still very, very closely related to the work of John Young and privacy in general and cryptography in general. So I was super saddened to hear about this. Honestly, I can't remember the last time someone I didn't actually know, I've never met him, someone I actually didn't know, I can't remember being this sad about hearing about the passing of someone that I didn't know directly. So it's a site I visited quite a bit, and I found it fascinating to see all this information because really transparency is what you need to avoid a corrupt government, to retain your rights. I mean, privacy as well. As I mention often enough, that privacy is really the only right that can protect all of your other rights. Without privacy, you really have nothing but a mirage of rights. Anything can be taken away once you lose your privacy, and that is one of the reasons that I put it at the forefront, really, of the channel over the last several years. But back to John Young, he was very active and in fact had contacts with Jullian Assange and was even considered one of the co-founders of WikiLeaks itself. Now, the thing about it is Cryptome was around way before WikiLeaks, and Cryptome, there was a lot of ideals behind it. Not that WikiLeaks doesn't have them, but John Young was an interesting character, and if you read any of his interviews, you could tell he had a sense of humor, a bit of a dry one, it appeared, but I appreciated a lot of these interviews. I've been doing a lot of reading on him. I never looked that deep into him. Apparently he was an architect from New York, and I found it interesting in this interview. He said Freedom of Information Act requests were useful, but after 9/11, they seemingly became much less useful. And I found that interesting. I mean, we know a lot has changed since 9/11, but it is interesting that they mention that Cryptome does a few Freedom of Information Act requests, which is where you request information to be released to the public, such as declassified records, things like that. And just all around transparency for government. So these are super important, and it's something that John had mentioned in this interview that he no longer could trust. At least according to him, he no longer believed they were forthcoming after 9/11. It seemed like there was increased secrecy. And really the most dangerous thing to your rights is secrecy. A lack of transparency, secrecy, which is essentially the same. If you have a lack of transparency, you're dealing with secrecy. And when you're dealing with secrecy and you're also combining spying with that, and the spying is increasing, the secrecy is increasing, you are in slow motion turning into some form of an authoritarian system. And so I can understand the viewpoints that John had in his work here. But apparently a lot of people were trying to take down the website Cryptome, including Microsoft, because he even leaked how they worked with police to do various types of work to help assist investigations. So a lot of interesting information was on Cryptome. And unfortunately, it looks like I can't visit it here in Tor browser. I also tried the I2P out proxy. I wasn't able to see it, but it doesn't appear to be up, unfortunately. And I know at one point he said he wasn't going to bring it back up until they released Jullian. But along with that, we can also see some other information on him. So he's also always been a voice for the whistleblowers, but he also was honest with them. So when he would take material as a publisher or a journalist, he would make it clear that he's not able to protect them. He wouldn't say use Tor or use this or that method. He would leave it up to them, because it really would be that serious, and you don't want to give, I guess, I'm just trying to put myself in their position, the idea that you can do something to protect someone if they make a mistake, like such as the printer paper with some of the tracking dots that actually go out when someone prints something can be traced back to the printer, just various things, and they're always going to be unknown. So I appreciate his candor there, that he was very candid about the fact that they are on their own protecting themselves when they deal with leaking information like that. And I also appreciated in his interview where at the end, another example of his sense of humor, John Young, the spiritual godfather of online leaking, he stated in the end of his interview, where he had the guy come in with an umbrella and basically, like, as they mentioned, out of a John Grisham novel kind of meeting atmosphere. He was rather paranoid, at least in this meeting time period. I don't know, maybe his views changed, but he wouldn't carry a cell phone because he said they're basically spy devices in your pocket. And then he ends the interview with a final point of friction. He states, "I'll talk to you, but until you publish something that puts you in prison, I won't fully respect you," he says with a blank face. So, I can just appreciate that kind of a sense of humor, regardless of if this person was ever going to publish anything to begin with. It is actually a writer for a book where he's interviewing John Young called This Machine Kills Secrets. Now, I couldn't visit this page on Tor browser, but maybe it'll work in another one if you want to check out that book. But, this is the spiritual godfather of online leaking, and absolutely deserves their very own video on this channel as reporting on their legacy. I mean, it's the least we can do to appreciate someone who spent many, many decades of their life up to the age of 89 pushing forward privacy technology, pushing forward protection and the importance of transparency along with privacy, given that we live in a world that is increasingly hostile to privacy technologies, increasingly hostile to transparency. And we should ask ourselves, what exactly does that mean when we are in a world that becomes increasingly hostile to privacy protection, increasingly hostile to even talking about the subject of privacy. Even a Reader's Digest article had stated that he was attracting terrorists. Now that's the kind of language, the kind of propaganda that we are very familiar with in this day and age when it's about, destroying encryption or putting back doors in encryption or otherwise weakening encryption. It's always to protect you. But you are much less likely to be harmed in a terrorist attack than you are to have an automobile accident and get hurt. So you're also more likely to have falling furniture hurt you than be involved or hurt in a terrorist attack. So the chances are really not there. It's an unwinnable war, and I'm sure that's something John could have recognized for himself as, unwinnable wars that have no real solution are going to continuously erode your rights until there are none left. I mean, that is the only thing that happens in war, is that your liberties become partially or more so sacrificed in the aims of accomplishing wins in a war. But and we've seen that throughout history. In every major world war, there's all kinds of things that happen that would never happen under normal rule of law. And so we can take a look back at John's legacy and see the importance of his promotion of transparency, the anti-surveillance approach, the entire disgust with really the surveillance of the world, and have a great appreciation for everything that John Young accomplished. And of course, we shouldn't neglect to say his partner, who of course, our thoughts are with, Deborah Natsios, if that's how you pronounce it. I hope I got it right. But in memory of John Young, as he said himself, he had many things to say. And I just had a great appreciation for someone who's willing to sit on that hill, to even go to prison for their beliefs. And that is exactly what he tried to do when Assange was being charged. He said they demanded to actually join and indict them too, because in fact, apparently, according to different reports, there were the same publishings on Cryptome as on WikiLeaks. So it's interesting that he didn't get indicted, but rest in peace to John Young, and his legacy. Really wanted to do something for it because, as mentioned, this is the spiritual godfather of online leaking. How could I miss doing a video on that? Rest in peace, John Young. You will be sorely missed.